Terrific. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here today. I'm pleased to be joined by Glenn Kaplan, who is chief of my office's Insurance and Financial Services Division. Also with me are two Massachusetts residents and consumers who have been helped through this settlement. We have with us today Kathy Bullock and Andrew Wilkinson. Today I am announcing an important recovery for consumers in Massachusetts and a first of its kind in the country settlement that is about protecting the economic security of families across our communities. Based on our investigation and today's settlement, Santander Bank will be returning $22 million to Massachusetts, including $16 million to more than 2,000 car buyers who were given unaffordable and unfair car loans. A few years ago, my office began receiving complaints from consumers across Massachusetts. These reports followed a similar pattern. These consumers needed to buy a new or pre-owned car, but couldn't afford them and needed a loan. The salesperson would offer a loan with high interest rates. To make the application go through, sales staff would often falsify or exaggerate these consumers' income on loan documents. And finally, banks and other lenders who knew full well that these documents were fraudulent would finance the loans, package them into bundles, and sell them to investors. A short time later, the buyers would start having problems by making the car payments, and many fell way behind. Many even lost their cars. Now, if this sounds familiar, it should. These predatory practices are almost identical to what we saw in the mortgage industry several years ago that ultimately led to the collapse of global financial markets. That crisis, as we know, devastated families and communities across Massachusetts. Many communities still have not recovered. But to some, unfortunately, in the auto industry, the global economic collapse was not a cautionary tale, but rather a blueprint. After receiving these complaints, we investigated Santander, the largest packager of subprime auto loan securities in the United States, and a major player in Massachusetts as well. Our investigation looked into Santander's role in facilitating these unfair and risky car loans to thousands of Massachusetts consumers. What we discovered was outrageous. Santander knew what was happening and kept making the loans anyways. Our investigation found that Santander's own internal audits showed that their oversight systems for these loans were inadequate. Santander even identified groups of problem car dealers who had higher levels of delinquency, default, and other issues. They even named a particularly bad group of car dealers the, quote, fraud dealers. And more than 2,000 customers here in Massachusetts, like Kathy and Andrew, got hurt by their games. Through this settlement, we're hoping to end this unfair practice, and I want the people of Massachusetts to know that when you buy a car and you take a loan, you're not going to be taken for a ride. With these funds, over 2,000 Massachusetts drivers will be able to pay off their car loans and avoid new defaults. On average, eligible consumers will receive thousands of dollars to help them pay off their car loans. Some of them will have their loans paid off entirely. This is right because these loans were unfair, they were predatory, and they took advantage of Massachusetts residents. At the same time, importantly, the companies agreed to implement new policies. Taken together, we are sending a strong message that unfair and deceptive car loans in Massachusetts are not welcome. And my office will continue to investigate and crack down on subprime lending practices. Predatory car loans, like predatory student loans or predatory home mortgages, hurt families, hurt communities. They lead to higher rates of default. They damage borrowers' abilities to get jobs and maintain jobs. When a family loses a car, they lose literally an economic lifeline. They lose their ability to get to work, to go to school, visit the doctor, or pick up the groceries. As Attorney General, it's my job to protect the economic well-being of our residents. That's the top priority for me. And that's what today is all about. Now, before I turn it over to Kathy and Erin, Kathy and Andy, to share their stories. I want to acknowledge again the incredible work of our Insurance and Financial Services Division, led by Division Chief Glenn Kaplan. I also want to recognize that this settlement would not have been possible were it not for the tremendous work of Assistant Attorney General Erin Lamb, who passed away in December at the age of 38. His wife, Margrethe Flanders, is here with us today. We thank you for joining us. Erin was an exceptional Assistant Attorney General, absolutely dedicated to the public interest. In the aftermath of the subprime lending crisis, it was Erin Lamb who led this office's major investigations into predatory mortgage securitizations, first of its kind work in this country. And Erin, through his efforts, was able to secure billions, and I did say billions, of dollars of relief for consumers here in Massachusetts. He allowed countless families in Massachusetts and across this country to stay in their homes. Erin is a beloved colleague and a friend for many here in the Attorney General's office. He will always be. And we mourn his loss. He is indeed irreplaceable and will always be missed. But I want to thank Erin and his colleagues for their leadership once again in tackling a very complex but troubling practice here, the securitization of car loans. Now I'm going to turn this over to Kathy and to Andy for them to share their stories. I'd like to call Kathy to the podium first. Kathy Bullock.
Thank you. I think Massachusetts is so lucky to have people like Erin Lamb and our Attorney General who were committed to holding predatory auto finance leaders accountable. I'm grateful to our Attorney General's office for personally answering my filing, my complaint, and following up on it, calling me, asking me questions about my story, and how I was forced into a relentless loan cycle of paying outrageous interest rates and fees without being able to effectively reduce the principal of my auto loan. And now the car is worth essentially $750, and I still owe $10,000 on it. Thousands of people, through no fault of their own in Massachusetts, have been victimized, and that's why we have to support financial regulation, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and our Attorney General, Maura Healey. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. You know, Kathy's story is familiar. Kathy and her daughter were unfortunately struck by a drunk driver years ago, and Kathy needed a car. And with the money she was able to recover from her insurance company, she couldn't go out and purchase a brand new car. So she went to a dealership to purchase a used car. And she also needed a loan to be able to purchase that car. And when she got that loan, what she later came to realize is that the dealership, through Santander and its financing, had exaggerated her income. And as a result, she was put into a loan that she couldn't afford. As she just told you, she's got a car, a Chevrolet, that's worth $750 today. She still owes $10,000 on that loan. This settlement is going to make that right and provide relief to Kathy. So, Kathy, thank you for calling our office. That's how many of our cases start, folks. It's with a call from a consumer who thinks they've been a victim of a business practice, an unfair business practice, and they make a call, and then we can set about getting to work. I also now want to join, or welcome to the podium, Andy. It is Andy's 29th birthday, so we like to think of this as a birthday gift to Andy Wilkerson, who is a medic in the Army, has been in the Army the last 10 years. He too found himself in need of a car when he needed to travel down to North Carolina to medic school, and instead ended up on the wrong end of the deal, which we're going to make right today for Andy and others as a result of this settlement. Andy.
Thank you, ma'am. I'd like to first thank the Attorney General's office really for taking my call. I, again, as Kathy, had fell victim to the scheme of high interest rates and not being informed or made aware of the interest rates in itself. My vehicle is now undrivable. It sits in my driveway, and it's probably right around about $2,000 in worth. and I owe probably close to $10,250, I believe is the last time I actually looked at the balance. I had originally gotten the vehicle because I was going to attend flight medic school for a new unit that was in North Carolina. My vehicle wasn't going to make the trip. My Jeep Grand Cherokee wasn't going to make the trip, so I got pulled into this loan unknowing that it was just going to take forever to pay this vehicle off. And the impact that it has, not necessarily on just the consumer, the individual itself, but the families of the consumers is just, it can be devastating. I was in a two-bedroom apartment after returning home from North Carolina. I was in a two-bedroom apartment with 4 people, and my 2 kids were in less than ideal circumstances with their living situation. My 2 kids, my son and my daughter, were living or were sleeping in the same room together, and it just wasn't really ideal. But because of the impact of the loan on my credit, looking for a home was almost impossible. I couldn't provide for my family. I couldn't provide the home that they deserved. So by reaching out to the Attorney General's office and having Erin and Glenn really put in the work to really make this right, it just speaks volumes to the state of Massachusetts, and it speaks volumes to the work ethic of the individuals here with the Attorney General. And I couldn't be thankful enough for all the work that was put into this. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Andy, and thank you for your ongoing service to the country. I understand you're going to go to the firefighting academy, so you'll continue to find ways to serve our communities, and it's only right that we do our work trying to do right by you and other families and consumers across this state. So again, I want to thank you for coming today. I'd be happy to take some questions. I do want to point out that I mentioned at the outset that Santander is the largest packager of these types of loans in the country and has a particular presence here in Massachusetts. Of the more than 2,000 drivers who we are going to help today as a result of our investigation and action, you can see that they are spread out in communities across the Commonwealth. And so we're pleased that that we will be reaching and able to reach so many people in so many different places. At this time, I'd be happy to take any questions.
You compared this to the mortgage crisis. Can you just kind of characterize the scope and scale of this beyond Santander in general?
Sure. Well, as I said, the what happened with the mortgage crisis is essentially what we see replicated when it comes to car loans. We had bad home mortgage loans out there years ago. Now we're seeing bad car loans using some of the very same tactics that were used by companies in the past. And think about the number of homes that are out there for purchase or refinancing. Think about the number of people with car loans in this state and across this country. We're talking about a big pool of people affected by financing. Not all financing practices are bad, but when they're bad and when they're predatory, it's our job to take them on, and that's what we did today. What do we see in terms of behavior? We see companies that use high-pressure sales tactics to get people in the door. They exaggerate or even falsify documents to make it look like consumers were in a better position to be able to pay back their loans than they actually were. Remember, in the home mortgage crisis, what we saw was a lot of people got loans that they knew, the banks knew at the outset, they could never afford to pay. But they were duped into signing, told everything would be fine, and only to later learn that they couldn't begin to pay back these loans and found themselves in default, losing their homes through foreclosure. Similarly, what happened with this situation is our investigation showed that this company brought people in, enabled people to sign up and take on debts, take on loans that they could never afford to repay. And they did that through poor oversight policies and practices, really lax management, also allowing to happen the falsification and exaggeration of actual documents. And as a result, we saw some of the same things happen to car buyers as we did to home buyers. They found themselves on the hook for loans they couldn't afford to pay. They went into default, and they end up with a serious hit to their credit, which, as Andy explains, that has an impact on his ability to actually rent a house or buy a house. And you have somebody like Kathy who ends up still on the hook, 10 grand owing on a car that today is only worth $750. So unfortunately, it's a similar practice. It involves the securitization of loans. Remember what happened back with home mortgage loans. These loans were made and then they were bundled together and sold to other buyers. So the risk was passed on. Once they did the deal, they didn't care. They didn't own the risk. And we saw what happened, and our economy really collapsed under the weight of these really predatory and unfair securitization practices. And that's a similar practice that we see in the auto industry when it comes to the financing of car loans. It's why we're taking this action today. I'm glad consumers came forward. I'm glad they know they can come to the Attorney General's office. And when we get wind of potentially predatory, unfair practices, we're going to investigate, get after it, take action, and in this case, look to make customers whole and really provide for better economic support for families here in Massachusetts. You know, car loans are really important. We know homes are important, but you think about the car and what it means to have a car, what it means to not have a car, and how that affects your life. And that's why this kind of work is really important to me and to our office, because we know the impact that can have on families across Massachusetts.
What's the relationship between Santander and these dealers? Because certainly no one's buying a car directly from Santander. And how much responsibility do these dealerships should they have?
Well, I think we're always mindful of the relationship with a car dealer, but here the fault is really with Santander. Santander owns the financing arrangement with car dealerships across the state. It is Santander, the bank, that knows and is responsible for processing accurate paperwork, making sure that paperwork has been vetted, and making sure that today, especially in the Commonwealth where the law of the land is, you cannot make loans to people that you know they can't afford to pay back, that they're the ones on the hook and responsible for making the kinds of appropriate loans that we expect them to make. So, you know, here again, I recounted some of the issues and what we uncovered in our investigation, where Santander had in receipt Santander documents, applications that contained false or exaggerated information. They actually kept a list of, and they knew the dealerships that had high rates of delinquency and default. They actually went so far as to characterize a particular subset of car dealerships as the, quote, fraud dealers. They knew what was happening, and the importance of a large financial institution like that is that we expect them to have in place the appropriate levels of controls and oversight to make sure that predatory practices aren't happening and consumers aren't being hurt. Terrific. Thank you all.